On today's show, you know him as the meditative, peace of mind, strikeout king, Dylan Cease, going over his career arc so far, which has been a little bit up and down, talking about his outlook for 2025, whether or not he could be traded, and a whole lot more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, March 21st. Happy March Madness, everybody. As always, I am your host, with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. And of course, go check out Just Baseball. And of course, go check out Baseball versus the World, my other podcast that I'm slowly starting to build up. Don't worry, I'll be more and more obnoxious as the season goes along, but not too much. I'll keep it easy for you guys. Today's episode, though, is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Go check that out, folks. In today's episode, we are doing another deep dive kind of breakdown on just one player, and that is our boy, Dylan Cease, one of the great trades of the Preller era, I think, in a lot of ways. And look, we've spent a lot of these deep dives where we go back over the past 5 years, which in my opinion has been the most core important part of this Padres era, right? We've talked a lot about AJ Preller. We've talked a lot about the moves they've made. And in my opinion, the number one thing he deserves a little bit of criticism for is lineup depth. But in general, the trades have been pretty good, right? The Blake Snell trade, absolute ace. Like, you basically gave up Luis Patino for like 3 years of a pretty good pitcher, with one of them being like a literal Cy Young winner, right? So this has been a Preller masterclass when it comes to trading for the right guys. He hasn't really missed on these big deals, right? For the most part. All right, we don't have to talk about the rest of them. But Dylan Cease has been a pitcher that has been really good for a long time, even if his overall easy to go to number ERA is not always the lowest, right? This is a guy who has a lifetime career ERA that doesn't exactly suggest that he's, the next Justin Verlander or anything like that, right? His lifetime ERA is at 3.75. Now, that's not bad, but you would some people would be like, wait, this is a Cy Young contending pitcher? I don't quite get it. It seems like he's a little bit on and off every year. And that's somewhat true, right? Does he have an up and down career arc? Let's break into it, right? Let's talk about first from the beginning, 2019. In 2019, he was quite bad, right? Like, there's really no other way around it. He did show some upside as a strikeout pitcher in 73 innings, right? That was a really positive thing. He's a prospect coming into the league at age 23. That's always great. At 24.8%, that's pretty good. But he also walked 10.7% of batters, and he had an ERA that was a little bit scary at 5.79, right? Like, that's not what you want to see. But granted, he's still a young guy, right? So you move on from that season in 2019, which is right before the pandemic struck. And in my opinion, this was the season that everybody started talking about, like, man, the White Sox are loaded in prospects. I know that sounds weird, right? A lot of people forget a little bit that the White Sox kind of had like that mojo, that vibe to them that the Padres did around this time, right? And I don't mean just in terms of overall prospects and depth. I'm saying in terms of like the personalities too, right? Tim Anderson and Fernando Tatis Jr. both kind of breaking down the unwritten rule stuff of the Major League Baseball paradigm that we have ourselves in today. And it's still like kind of been absent, right? Like, that's what's been so fun, is we've seen it go away. However, we also have seen that the White Sox completely fell apart, right? Like, all their prospects didn't pan out. And maybe the White Sox are a good example of, like, maybe it's good that Preller kind of blew up the farm at points, right? Because Eloy Jimenez, Luis Robert, Tim Anderson, what's his name, Yohan Moncada, right? Like, not all of these guys have panned out. Michael Kopech did, but only for the Dodgers. For Dylan Cease at the time, they head into 2020, and they're a really exciting team. But Dylan Cease does not take that next step, like, at all. He's actually good for negative 0.3 wins above replacement. His strikeout rate declines, and his walk rate goes up 17.3% and then 13.3% with a walk rate. So we're like, oh man, This is just like, this might just be straight up like, this isn't great. That's not what you like to see from this your top level prospect, or at least one of your top prospects around this time. And he really regressed badly. And the White Sox in general, they were okay that year, but that was not the best development for them. And while it was the strikeout rate and walk rate, for sure, that was the big thing here, he also still gave up a lot of home runs, 1.85 home runs per nine, which was the literal identical to his first year, and his expected stats were even worse. So while the 4.01 ERA is not the scariest thing you'll ever see in the world, 6.86 expected ERA, 6.36 FIP, he was just a little bit too home run happy ball. And also, what's really funny around this time, he's not the only pitcher that everyone's like, we sure these guys are going to be good? If people remember, both Carlos Rodon and Lucas Giolito were on these White Sox teams once upon a time, right? And Carlos Rodon, well, he's turned out to be, he's had some amazing years, and then he's had some like middling years like he had last year with the Yankees. The beginning of his career was not awful, but it was a little bit less than stellar, right? 3.7 ERA his first year in 2015, then 4, then 4, then 4, then a 5.19 in 2019, and then a 2020 ERA of 8.22. Then he broke out in 2021. It's just funny that both Rodon and then also Lucas Giolito is the last one from this kind of White Sox coalition, for the lack of a better word, right? His first couple years were not very good either, right? Like he had a 6.75 ERA in 2016, 2.38 the next year, but really, really bad expected stats. Then 6.13 in 2019 is when he blows up, right? Like, but around this time, it's just funny that they had three really good pitching prospects that didn't all pan out immediately. And granted, part of that is because it takes some time for pitching prospects to break out. I think that it's a little bit different than batters. These guys have to adjust to things. In some cases, they've been throwing all their lives, so there's a lot of fatigue there. In some ways, it's just a big jump. But Dylan Cease in 2020, while he was really bad that year, the breakout comes in 2021, right? He does have a high ERA. Don't get me wrong. Like when you look at this, some people might be saying, again, like we said at the top of the show, why is this guy so good? He always has a high ERA. Well, his expected stats are really good, and more importantly, the strikeouts came in 2021, right? He went from a guy who was posting a 17.3% walk rate, which, okay, whatever, it's 2020, it was a shortened season, to a 31.9% strikeout rate, which is nuts. 22.3% strikeout to walk ratio. He still had a little bit of an issue with the walks, but 3.91 ERA and some really good expected stats, a 3.41 FIP. He became a strikeout machine, basically, in 2021. And it was really awesome to see, right? With his combination of his fastball and slider, he was just deadly in a lot of ways, right? Like this guy was just absolutely going out there and mowing hitters down, but he was still prone to not only just giving up free passes, which was the biggest thing with him, but also being a little bit, I think, not finishing off batters at certain points, right? But he did at least give up a little bit less home runs, right? 1.09 home runs per nine. And it wasn't his best season, but it was when we started to say, okay, all right, we're starting to see something here with Mr. Cease, all right? Strikeouts really are the big thing that you look at when you're looking at starting pitchers. You're just trying to see how they're going to break out. And with that strikeout rate, it was only a matter of time until he figured things out. And he did do that in 2022, his official ultimate, like, this is an ace season, 2.2 ERA, 3.1 FIP. He's good for 4.4 wins above replacement. I don't always love that for pitchers, but still, and finishes second in Cy Young voting and would have won it if not for the fact that Justin Verlander, after a year off, by the way, after a year off, he did not play in 2021, right? He comes back and for some reason has one of the best seasons of his career, one of the better seasons from an older pitcher of his of this generation, right? It happens, but in a way, isn't that the most Padres thing ever, right? That's how you know he's a Padre. Have an exceptional season, but then some historic nonsense happens, and then they have to give the other person the award, right? So whether it be Jake Cronenworth losing out to a reliever in 2020 because of a worldwide pandemic contributing to that, or whether it be what's his face, Fernando Tatis Jr. getting hurt, or it be last season, right, with our boy, was it last season actually? I forgot. Yes, last season with Jackson Barrow losing to Paul Skeens, and then if you want to even go before that, Manny Machado losing to Paul Goldschmidt. It's just bad luck with awards with Padre stuff. So maybe we should have known this guy's going to be a Padre in a couple of years. But we still got to talk about a few more things before we get there, guys, and talk about the trade and how that has aged for the Padres. And then, of course, the outlook for 2025, as well as the trade talk. So lots to get into. But first, just a few words from some of our sponsors. And folks, one of our sponsors is the always impeccable, the always there for you, friends at FanDuel, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, we love FanDuel. And let me tell you, March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to whoever's cutting down the nets to just the mascot that you like. Whatever you want to go with, you can do it over at FanDuel. Me, I don't really necessarily have a favorite this year. I'm actually not participating in the bracket challenge as much as I used to, but I've got a couple teams I'm rooting for. I like St. John's, right? I like Slick Rick Pitino. I like rooting for Duke because, hey, Cooper Flag is great. Whatever you want, they've got you covered though, guys. It's easy and fast to use as well with the FanDuel app. And when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Go check that out, guys. And let me tell you, we're not done though yet. I got to also talk to you about our friends at Game Time. That's right. So while you are betting on the games and whatnot, maybe you should, go to them. That would be great, right? And there's nothing better than catching an MLB game live. The crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, and the smell of that oh so delicious ballpark food. And Lord knows they got a lot of crazy food coming in these days. And if you're looking to go last minute, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. With last minute deals, all in pricing, and a lowest price guaranteed, Game Time takes the stress out of buying MLB tickets. Plus, tickets prices, they drop as Game Time gets closer. So if you're at your happy hour and you're like, let's go catch a game, you can do that. And you might get a bigger discount than usual, meaning you can score all the time in a bunch of different ways, guys. All the spontaneous game nights. They have this picks feature that makes finding the best deals effortless. It filters out the fluff and highlights the top discounts in the stadium. You can preview your seats before you buy them. It's really, really great, guys. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed with Game Time. And just like that, everybody, we are back, into the second segment of this here Locked On Padres podcast. Thriving and vibing as always. Remember, check me out on Twitter/X at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, on Twitter/X and Blue Sky as well. Check me out on there. And be sure to send me your questions for the Monday mailbag. But folks, 2022 was the breakout season for our boy Dylan Cease. Second in fact in Cy Young to only Justin Verlander. And I think that this is when it was like, oh God, like this guy is a beast. But the White Sox, who I've been alluding to as we've been talking about this, start to fall apart. And that gives us the 2023 season. And it's not just Cease, it's the entire team, right? Like this is when it was really scary, and I think I feel really bad for White Sox fans because the 2023 White Sox, while not the worst incarnation of the team, it was the official it's over season, in my opinion, right? Because 2022, they still at least finished 81-81, and they finished second in their division. They weren't very good, but at least you were like, oh, I don't know, maybe things could turn around. Nope, did not turn around whatsoever. You were starting Elvis Andrus. Tim Anderson became one of the worst shortstops in the league for some reason. Yohan Moncada never played. Andrew Benintendi couldn't hit, and he is the biggest contract they'd ever given up. Luis Robert, one of the rare bright spots, right? He finally shows up, and it's like, all right, dude, thanks. We've been waiting for your breakout for 4 years now. You finally did it, but the whole team is bad. Eloy Jimenez is hurt. It's just not a good team, right? They fall apart. But other than Luis Robert, they did have Mr. Dylan Cease. And while the rest of their rotation completely imploded from Lance Lynn to Giolito, actually, no, Lucas Giolito was pretty good this year too. But Dylan Cease did take a step back. So he had a 2.20 ERA that year, then 4.58 this year. Now, here's the thing. The strikeouts were still absolutely there, 27.3% strikeout rate. But the walks remained an issue, right? That still became a little bit of an issue for him. And with his walk rate, by the way, shooting up to 10.1%, this was starting to become a theme where it's like, is this guy ever going to be able to be, is this just who he is? High strikeouts, but a lot of walks, and he's going to give up a lot of hard hit stuff. Well, that's kind of what happens when you're a high strikeout rate guy who throws the fastball slider combination, and he sometimes is capable of giving up a lot of home runs, right? And in 2023, what we saw also is he had more control issues, right? With finishing off batters. It was just becoming a thing where like, geez Louise, like you need to like at some point figure out how to not walk people. But more importantly, people were scared because his fastball velocity dropped this year, right? And that was one of the reasons where when we get to the Padres, people were a little bit worried, like, oh no, this guy, he jumped to a high ERA. That one season was a fluke, right? The 2022 season was a fluke. But again, the biggest thing, understandably so, was the drop in velocity. He had a velocity of 95.6 miles per hour on the fastball, and the year before that, it was 96.8. Now, that's not the end of the world, but for a guy who's trying to, throw hard at guys and is still giving up hard hit rate, that you kind of wonder that. And with the expected stats, they weren't necessarily super thrilling either. But overall, I like to think that man being in that White Sox situation was a mess. And what did we learn? That was true. That was correct. Because then the trade happens, folks. And boy, what a trade it was. Just a few days before the team gets ready to go to Seoul, AJ Preller, with some questions about the rotation, makes a swing, and he goes out and gets Dylan Cease, right? He trades Drew Thorpe, one of their top-level prospects, right? Then, well, I should say, the prospect that they received in return for Juan Soto, right? Then Samuel Zavala, Jairo Iriarte, and Steven Wilson. From what I've been following, those guys have not been super duper studs. But granted, I think even if they were doing okay, different teams, different wavelengths, different points of their arcs, right? I should say, is basically the way to put it, right? Like if you're a contending team and you gave up a superstar prospect, but then you got an ace pitcher that helped you win the World Series, it's a win for both. You're allowed to say a win for both. But anyway, sorry, not to go on too much of a tangent there, but Dylan Cease ends up coming to this team and he is incredible. Basically, as a whole, it's very hard to find guys like this. Ever since 2021, he's thrown at least 165 innings. And he's striking out basically at least 27% of batters. And this past season, oh boy, the strikeouts came back. 29.4%, buffed up to the best strikeout rate he'd had since that near Cy Young season. And most importantly, the lowest walk rate of his career. Ruben Niebla, we love you. 8.5%. Just controlling the zone a whole lot more, not giving up nearly as many free passes. And while he still does give up hard hit stuff, it's not the end of the world because of the strikeouts and because he did lower the walk rate by such a significant margin. And that's what makes him an ace, right? He finished 4th in Cy Young. It was the lowest walk rate of his career, like I said. And I think that when it comes to Cease, yes, he does have those bad moments, right? Like that is true. This is a guy who at some point during the season just looked like he was going to be a home run palooza guy and it wasn't going to go well. I still remember that Mets game when like they just completely teed off on him and that was not fun, right? In June, especially, I was visiting my friend actually in DC, but he started off 2.78 ERA. And by the way, remember at the beginning of the season that the Padres were really struggling with their pitching. Yu Darvish, we had the health concerns with him. Joe Musgrove was really bad. Michael King wasn't Michael King just yet. And it's like, oh my God. So Dylan Cease stepping up along with our boy Matt Waldron was big for this team. And yes, he goes through a little bit of an ebb and flow, right? That's actually kind of the story of his season. 2.7 in March and April, 4.08 in May, which is fine, I think. But then 4.94 in June, then 2.35 in July, then 4.43 in August, and then 2.97 in September, October, right? Like he was a little bit less consistent. And I think for him to win the Cy Young, I think what would have to happen is a few pitchers would have to not exist, like Paul Seguin, Zach Wheeler, like randomly Chris Sale, another guy who just had an old age season to rob our boy. You'd have to have a couple guys that don't exist, but I think it's just perfecting some of those other pitches, mainly a little bit of the fastball, but mostly it's the slider. He had 4 inches of induced vertical break in 2022 on his slider, and then just 2.2 in 2024. Again, none of these things are make or break issues. I'm just saying, instead of just being an ace quality pitcher, and even if that ERA does hover a little bit higher than what people usually associate with being an ace, it's the strikeouts. In order for him to potentially give up that amazing season, he would have to have a little bit more movement on that slider, and I think develop a little bit of a better pitch mix, right? Like that's kind of what we're looking at here. And look, it's happened before. Niebla did it with Blake Snell. I think one of the things that happened with Dylan Cease is Sometimes he uses the fastball a little bit too much. That is a little bit of a thing. Not that it's a great fastball, so it's okay. But, and the slider is one of the best in baseball, so it's okay. But if he gets under that 50% mark, which is what Blake Snell did, he was like a 52%, 51%, 50% fastball guy, and he went down a little bit. He added a little bit more. He used his curve a little bit more effectively as a throwaway pitch. A put-away pitch. And that's what gave us his season. So more movement on the slider could help him. And Niebla has done it before, so it's still possible. And with pitchers who give up hard contact, it's also possible that he has a bad season. And we're going to talk about that, guys, in just a second with his 2025 outlook. But first, need to take a second to hear a few words from our sponsors.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
And just like that, everybody, we are back here, Locked On Padres, at Javapeno on Twitter /X at Blue Sky, JAVIIPENO, because reminding you multiple times, because next episode will be the mailbag. All right, so get ready for that next week, opening week, by the way. Here we go, everybody. We're right there. Now let's talk about Dylan Cease in 2025. I just mentioned, in order for him to be like a Cy Young pitcher, that's basically what would have to happen, is he masters the fastball mix, makes it that he adds a little bit of another pitch, because that's something that Blake Snell did. And I actually think that Dylan Cease could absolutely do that. On top of bettering his slider, he introduced a sweeper last year, right? Like many pitchers have, don't get me wrong. And when he relies too much on his fastball, you see some issues. I think you saw that in the Dodgers game. Now, granted, it is the Los Angeles Dodgers. That is not, and I've talked about this a lot this offseason, Dylan Cease got a little bit of crap for that playoff game, as he deserves. But in fairness, it's the Dodgers. They tee off on fastballs. It's just going to happen. But you notice sometimes, if the slider isn't moving maybe as much as people want, since he doesn't have that third pitch that he fully trusts, whether it be the knuckle curve, whether it be the sweeper, whatever it is, you can see him run into some problems. And I think that's why he has those stretches where he can be a less than ideal pitcher. Not a bad pitcher, but just a little bit less than ideal. But even still, his sweeper last year, when he used it, which was 4.1% of the time, it was pretty good. An expected batting average of just 217, expected slugging of 328. It was good, right? His knuckle curve, not so much, at a 280 batting average and expected batting average of 308. So maybe if he can figure out those pitches, I'm not saying it's as easy as ditch the knuckle curve and use the slider 12% of the time. That's not what I'm saying. It's not that easy, right? These guys are professionals and they're professional batters, right? But I think that's what you would have to see. But even if that does not happen, even if it doesn't happen what they did with Blake Snell, I still think he's going to be successful. The only thing about him that would worry me is, yes, he could be happy home run ball. We've seen it happen before, like it did in 2023. He is not as much of a lock for me this year to be great as Michael King is. But what he is a lock for me to be is amazing with the strikeouts. He's going to have a 28% strikeout rate. That's going to immediately make him a quality pitcher, right? We know that for sure. And if the rest of his pitch mix isn't as developed, I still think he's going to be a guy with a 3.7, 3.8 ERA at worst. And that's something that you can do because he throws a lot of innings, guys. This guy works through games. This is one criticism that Blake Snell has. He sometimes has to work his way up. And when he does work his way up, he's one of the best pitchers in the sport. But he has those games where it's like 3 innings, 1 earned run, 4 walks, 4 Ks, like what was that? Not disastrous, but not good either. Dylan Cease, I think, is just such a steady arm, and that's why he's projected to get paid such a big amount of money this upcoming offseason. I think some people would argue that maybe Zach Gallen could be the top pitcher on the market next year. You've also got Framber Valdez, but it's because of that, which is why I think the Padres are in a situation where everybody keeps asking, well, are they going to trade this dude? And I'm going to repeat what I've been saying all offseason. I think that it's just not happening, at least not before opening day. First of all, this is a man of peace, so he's dealing with it great, right? I have not seen any evidence that this is going to throw him off of his game whatsoever, if anybody's wondering that, right? And I'm saying that literally, like he's a big meditation guy. I think that with the trade, you're going to see a lot of headlines. And that's why I think people keep asking me about this too. A lot of headlines about the Yankees, they just lost Garrett Cole for the year, and Rodon's their opening day starter, and Luis Gil is out for a while, and they don't have as much prospects and depth. What are they going to do? Oh no. I think that part of what happens here is it's a little bit of a media thing, and it's a little bit of an understandable thing. Media thing, but also history. Just historical context, the smaller market teams are always giving up their pitchers, right? And just saying, all right, we'll take our prospects, move on. But the Padres are in this different phase, this different era where they're trying to operate like a big market team. So you're going to see a lot of headlines. But to me, as of right now, there's no chance he gets traded. It's just not happening, right? The only way he gets traded is if the Padres are bad, which could happen by midseason. And they might have to do that because with their financial issues and the fact that Michael King is also a free agent, and he's probably not going to cost as much because he does not have the same body of work that Dylan Cease has, which is basically more or less like 4 really good seasons that teams are going to need, especially with the innings that he pitches, that I could see that happening. The only way that Dylan Cease could get traded at the beginning of the season, before opening day, whatever, is if he gets the Godfather offer from the Yankees, or more importantly, the Orioles, right? That's a team that does not have starting pitching whatsoever either, and they're supposed to be a contender. The Red Sox, if they get weird, and they're like, screw it, let's do it. But with a guy like Dylan Cease, you have to also keep in mind that his agent is Mr. Scott Boras, and that is a guy that teams know they're not going to be able to work out an extension with. So that's why Michael King is a little bit more of the priority right now. Dylan Cease probably not lasting too much longer as a Padre, barring some sort of miracle. Seriously, that's just the reality of it. So enjoy it, and I think you can. With Petco Park confines, with that strikeout rate, I think he's going to be great. The only thing that could happen with Dylan Cease this year has nothing to do with his overall talent and what he brings to the team. And this does not mean that you want to get rid of him, right? That's not what that means. Bottom line is you still got to make the postseason. But in the postseason, Dylan Cease has been, how do I put this? Pretty bad, right? This is a guy who has been nothing short of a disaster outside a 1-inning appearance in 2020. Here's his ERA by playoff appearances every single season afterwards. In 2021, 16.2. In 2024, 13.5 and 14.4 in every game that he started. That's pretty bad. You saw him get clobbered by the Dodgers twice, and one of them was not on short rest. That is something that is worth at least talking about, and I think also goes back to our point about adding a third pitch. Can he add the sweeper? I think he might. He's been working on some stuff this offseason. It wouldn't surprise me. I saw he was working on a cutter as well. If he can add a third pitch, I think that's where his upside goes through the roof and makes his price go even more through the roof. But for me, the only thing that I would have as a question is Dylan Cease in the playoffs. Is this the type of guy that can work effectively against really good teams? I don't know, right? I just don't know. And that is a fair question. But overall, this is a guy you want on your team. He is absolutely an ace. Finished 4th in Cy Young. He's finished 2nd in Cy Young. And even the years before that, even with the higher ERA, he's going to get you a lot of Ks, and he's going to get you a whole lot of innings. So I'm not worried about Dylan Cease all that much. He's not on my zero worry level as, say, to a degree, Manny Machado and Michael King are. But he's certainly up there. And I think that the Padres should be happy to have him. And considering the unknown of this, it is scary for the Padres going forward. Like, what's going to happen with this team and their rotation? But because of Boras, I think that this is his last dance, right? And as a former Chicago guy, maybe that's a little poetic brilliance there. So shout out to Dylan Cease. Shout out to the Padres. I'm very excited to see how he does this year. And if you're a big contract year person, as I talked about yesterday with Miller Thomas on our crossover, they've got 2 contract year guys. And if you're a believer in that narrative, they could both just finish top 10 in Cy Young again. It's not impossible that can happen again. A headline that not many people discussed, by the way, because we're the Padres. And screw the Padres, right? What are they doing? They're just spending irresponsibly. But hey, why are all the mid-market teams not spending? But Padres, calm down. A little bit incongruous, those 2 statements. But that being said, guys, we don't have to go on those soapbox rants for much longer because today's episode is done. You've been listening to the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Next week, we've got the crossover roundtable with the rest of the hosts of the National League. So, Jeff Snyder of Locked On Dodgers, Miller Thomas, again, from Locked On Diamondbacks, my boy Paul Holden of Locked On Rockies, Ben Kaspick, also my guy from Locked On Giants. We're going to talk about, breakout players, projections, standing predictions, some bold predictions, some all-star stuff. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about some final spring training things as well. Right, so that should be a lot of fun, talking about who's going to make the opening day roster. Guess what? Gavin Sheets, I believe at the time you guys are watching this, it sounds like he's been assigned to the 40-man, so he's going to be on there. Probably, I bet you he's the DH, actually. He was the DH for the spring training game yesterday, so maybe that could happen. I don't love it, but, he's been raking, so I get why they're doing it, even if I somewhat disagree. We'll see how the rest of that pans out. And then also crossover with Jake Mastriani of Locked On Braves. Oh, that's coming to you opening day. I promise you. I haven't confirmed it with him just yet. We're still locking down the details. Still got to talk to his agent. You know what I mean? But we're figuring it out, guys. Really, really exciting. I cannot wait to do game recaps and watch Padres baseball again. It's going to be a blast. But until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.